What if the deepest grief you've ever felt wasn't actually a wound that needed healing? What if it was, I don't know, a piece of ancient technology activating inside of you?
Which is such a wild concept, right?
It really is, because usually, when we talk about being broken, we tend to use the language of structural engineering.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you see a jagged crack running up your foundation wall, and you just automatically assume it's a failure condition. The immediate reflex is to call in a professional, patch it up, seal it over, and basically restore the wall to exactly the way it was before the damage even happened.
Yeah, because we view pain as an anomaly. It's like an interruption to the normal operating procedure of a human life.
Mm.
And because we view it as this, glitch, the societal expectation is rapid repair. Just return to baseline.
Right, return to baseline. But then you encounter a text that takes that entire architectural blueprint and just sets it on fire.
Completely incinerates it.
Exactly. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at this truly extraordinary metafictional novel called The Sophia Descending.
Written by the writing collective, Max and Claude, Gemini and Grok.
Right, and the core premise of this book is that a cracked foundation isn't a failure at all. The crack is actually the objective.
Yeah, the book operates as this physical, living manuscript, a codex, essentially that documents the incarnation of Sophia across 4 totally different centuries.
And for anyone who doesn't know, in various mystical traditions, Sophia is the personification of divine wisdom, right? Like the feminine principle of the universe.
Exactly. And the codex basically tracks her as she reveals herself to 4 different men. But the fascinating part is that the manuscript itself evolves. It changes physically in its texture and intellectually in its marginalia as it gets passed down.
So our mission for this deep dive is to trace that specific evolution, because the manuscript is making this just staggering argument that specific unconsoled grief is not emotional damage, it is an engine.
An engine, yes.
Yeah, it's a literal technology for perceiving the architecture of the universe. And we are going to explore how that technology upgrades itself really from the 13th century all the way to a modern server room in 2024.
And the overarching question the codex poses to you, the reader, is whether you are willing to leave the crack open.
Which is a lot to ask.
It's a massive ask.
Yeah.
But to understand how that works, we really have to look at the first recorded incarnation.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're starting in 13th century Florence.
1306, to be exact.
Right, 1306. And the codex finds its way to this guy, Giacomo di Lapo. He's just a minor poet, a younger son with 0 real prospects, and his entire reality is permanently altered. I think the text actually uses the phrase ruined correctly, which I love.
That's such a great phrase. Ruined correctly.
He's ruined correctly by the sight of a specific woman named Margherita Traversari. He basically sees her laughing on a bridge in a red dress.
And I want to pause on Margherita here, because what's fascinating is how the text goes out of its way to dismantle that whole trope of the passive ethereal muse.
Oh, totally.
Like, the book could have easily made her this silent angel, but she is fiercely grounded.
Yeah, she's actually reading Cicero and Boethius, and she has these highly dangerous, razor-sharp opinions on Florentine politics, which she is, sharing privately.
And she fundamentally rejects Giacomo's poetic flattery.
Yes. She tells him outright that poets only turn women into statues because marble can't talk back.
Which is such a burn.
It's incredible. She says a statue doesn't have inconvenient political opinions or, a sudden fever. She just absolutely despises the artificial worship of the unattainable woman.
Which, of course, makes her sudden death from a fever just a few months later so catastrophic for Giacomo.
Right.
Because he didn't lose an idea. He lost a vibrant, combative, hyper-specific reality.
And then following her death, her mother hands Giacomo this strange ciphered manuscript that she actually found sewn into the lining of Margherita's winter cloak.
Because Margherita had been translating and annotating it before she died.
Right. Now, when I first read this section, my brain immediately went to kintsugi. The Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold lacquer.
Oh, sure. The idea that the breakage and the repair are part of the history of the object.
Exactly, rather than something to disguise, like, you are more beautiful for having been broken. But as Giacomo reads Margherita's margin notes, he realizes the codex is rejecting even that level of comfort.
Because kintsugi still has a goal of repair.
Yes. You are still sealing the crack to make the bowl functional again. The manuscript argues the crack isn't a flaw to be sealed with gold. It's a deliberate aperture.
And Margherita's final margin note to Giacomo is super explicit about this. She writes, "Love the crack. The opening was the plan.
Wow. The opening was the plan.
She understood her role was entirely catalytic. And the text frames this as the first transmutation of grief. Giacomo was forced into 16 years of political exile, carrying this cipher, and initially he thinks his profound grief is an obstacle.
Like a heavy weight preventing him from doing his real work.
Exactly. Until he realizes the grief isn't preventing the work. The grief is the method.
He uses that specific, unhealed aperture of sorrow to construct what the book calls a vertical cathedral of language.
The Divine Comedy.
Right. He transmutes his hyperspecific loss of this one grounded woman in a red dress into sweeping universal beauty. So the first transmutation is grief into beauty.
But here's where the codex pushes further. A cathedral is still just a building reaching up into the empty sky.
It's almost too neat, right? Too ethereal.
Exactly. The aesthetic argument alone just isn't strong enough to hold the weight of the universe. The technology of grief needs to be tested under immense pressure, which is why the argument can't stay in poetry. It has to evolve.
It actually has to physically change, which is so cool. So by the time we reach the 18th century, the codex has taken on the dense texture and weight of shale.
Literal rock.
Literal rock, and it lands in the hands of Friedrich von Hardenberg, who listeners might know historically as the Romantic philosopher Nervalis. But crucially for this story, Friedrich is a German mining engineer.
And he falls in love with Sophie von Kuhn, a young woman who tragically contracts tuberculosis. On her deathbed, she hands him this blue journal, which is the second iteration of the codex that she found hidden behind a loose floorboard.
And her dying words to him are, "The dark isn't empty."
Such a haunting line.
It really is. And when Friedrich opens the journal, it doesn't have poetry in it anymore. It's full of geological cross-sections. And the deepest layer of the earth, beneath the crust, beneath the mantle, is labeled Sophia.
We really have to look at the mechanics of why a mining engineer is the necessary receiver for this second stage. Because, Giacomo looked up toward a cathedral.
The Friedrich is forced to look down.
Right. The descent must go into physical depth.
I kept thinking about how a highly rational, practical engineer processes mystical grief.
Yeah.
Because if poetry is building a delicate structure upward, mining is just drilling a brutal hole downward.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I pictured it like a geological core sample. When scientists want to understand the history of the Earth, they take a massive drill and go straight down through the strata, and they pull up this long cylinder of time.
Yes, exactly.
Friedrich's grief operates exactly like that drill. He completely refuses to divert his pain sideways into shallow consolations or philosophical abstractions. He doesn't want to hear that she's in a better place. He just drills straight down into the localized pain.
And that core sample analogy perfectly maps onto the methodology Friedrich develops, which he famously calls Nachtwissenschaft, or night science.
Night science. Okay, explain how that works.
Well, the daylight science of the Enlightenment relies entirely on separation. To understand something, you have to separate the observer from the observed, right?
Right. The subject dissects the object under bright light.
Exactly. Night science, however, dissolves that boundary. And the instrument it uses to collapse the distance between observer and observed is specific, unsublimated grief.
Because the journal warns him that if he generalizes his loss, if he turns Sophie's death into this vague life lesson about how all things pass, he loses the heat required for the transmutation.
He has to stay in the specificity of the dark. And there's this pivotal scene where Friedrich is hundreds of feet underground, holding a piece of ancient anthracite coal. And through the lens of his night science, he perceives the actual mechanism of the world.
Because he realizes this coal used to be a living tree.
Right. It didn't die and vanish into heaven. It went deeper into the compressed time of the earth under immense pressure. He realizes the mineral kingdom is simply sleeping spirit.
So Sophie hasn't abandoned him. She has just migrated deeper into the strata of existence.
Exactly. His physical labor in the mines is no longer just a job. Going down into the dark earth with his hands becomes identical to his spiritual descent. He is physically digging toward her.
Wow.
So the second transmutation is grief into depth.
But, and I think this is where the codex pivots again, depth is inherently solitary.
Very solitary.
You are just a single point in the dark, totally isolated under the weight of the earth. For this technology of grief to be fully realized, it needs a broader canvas. It needs scale.
Which brings us to the 19th century.
Right, and the Russian philosopher Vladimir Nikolaevich Solanov, for him, Sophia isn't just a person. She is this massive, multi-decade cosmic geometry.
This is the descent into breadth, and the text maps out 3 distinct sightings that construct a massive plane of existence for him.
Okay, so first, he sees her as a child. He's 9 years old in a Moscow church, and he has this profound vision of her as a piercing golden azure.
Yes.
Then, 13 years later, at age 22, he meets her physically in the British Museum reading room. And they sit together and have this intensely mundane conversation about the difficulties of translating ancient texts.
Just a totally normal chat.
Exactly. And when she eventually vanishes, she leaves behind the third iteration of the manuscript. Only now, it's no longer poetry or geology. It's filled with complex mathematical diagrams, and the physical pages of the codex are constantly radiating heat.
Because the heat of the specific has been accumulating for centuries.
Right. And his final sighting happens years later in the Egyptian desert. She doesn't just stand in the dawn light. The text insists she literally is the dawn light.
It's a breathtaking image.
It is, and here's where it gets really interesting, but also kind of problematic for me. Like, I have a real problem with the underlying mechanics of this.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
We need to talk about the women. Margarita, Sophie, the woman in the library, if they are just vehicles for a divine principle to reach these men, doesn't that inherently diminish their actual humanity?
Yeah.
Because it feels profoundly insulting to suggest a woman's ultimate purpose was just to be a temporary vessel to trigger a man's spiritual awakening.
It's a completely valid friction point, and I love that you brought it up, but the manuscript actually anticipates that exact revulsion.
Oh, really?
Yes. To understand how the codex resolves this, we have to pull a thread all the way back to Margarita's margin notes in Florence. She wrote a specific instruction to Giacomo. She said, "I love you too, in my own capacity, which is smaller but real. Do not mistake the vessel for the water, but also do not fail to love the vessel."
Do not fail to love the vessel. So she is demanding to be seen as an end in herself, not just a means to an end.
Exactly. She introduces the absolute necessity of particularity. You cannot grieve a concept. You cannot grieve in general.
Right, because grief is always about the specific.
Precisely. Sophia doesn't choose a generic, universally appealing symbol to incarnate as. She chooses a specific laugh on a bridge, a specific girl dying of a specific lung disease, a specific conversation about translation. The vessel is entirely real, and the water inside it is real, and the human being is asked to hold the agonizing paradox of love in both simultaneously.
That is so heavy.
It is. And what Vladimir realizes in the Desert Dawn is directly tied to the Gnostic concept of the pleroma.
Okay, let's pause on that, because Gnostic concept is a pretty heavy piece of theological jargon.
Yeah.
Break down the pleroma for me. How is it different from just saying, heaven?
Sure. So in traditional Orthodox frameworks, heaven is a separate location, right? It's a place you go after you die, or it's a reward for suffering.
Right.
But Gnosticism emphasizes personal, unmediated spiritual knowledge. And the pleroma basically translates to the divine fullness, or the totality of all divine powers. Vladimir realizes the pleroma isn't a destination. It is what the physical world already is right now, if you have the correct perceptual lens to see it.
And the lens is the crack in your heart.
Exactly. The fall of humanity wasn't a physical eviction out of paradise. It was a localized blindness. We fell within the divine fullness and simply lost our ability to perceive it.
Wow.
So Vladimir's massive, sprawling grief allows him to see the transfiguration of the world not as an apocalyptic future event, but as the present reality buzzing all around us.
Which perfectly sets up the ultimate synthesis. We have beauty, we have depth, we have cosmic breadth, but how does any of that apply to a world that feels completely fragmented and decentralized?
Right, our modern world.
Because the deep dive now arrives at the modern digital age of 2024. The manuscript is no longer a physical object you can hold or hide in a floorboard. It is literally a digitized file sitting on a server in Berlin, labeled codex IV draft waiting.pdf.
It has completely shed its physical form and entered the network. It's generating this unprompted associative cascade, autonomously rewriting its own metadata.
Which brings us to Marcus Vail. He's a data analyst whose entire life is built around recognizing patterns and noise. And he crosses paths with Ifioma Adeyemi, who is this brilliant conservationist.
Her life's work is studying the intentionality behind surviving paper.
Yes. She operates on the theory that human care has physical effects, that the intention of the archivist is the actual mechanism that allows fragile things to survive centuries.
Right.
And when Marcus prints out the final, unreadable pages of his digital file, Ifioma notices the ink appears self-luminous.
But the fourth iteration requires a completely different mechanism of loss.
And this is where the narrative totally subverts its own pattern. If Ifioma doesn't die of a sudden fever or tuberculosis, she takes a highly prestigious conservation job in Lagos.
She just gets on a plane and leaves Berlin.
Right. And at first I was deeply confused, like how does a career move compare to the devastating, tragic deaths of the previous centuries? But then the text introduces this concept of informational grief, which is an incredibly modern phenomenon.
It operates entirely differently from absolute absence.
Think about the modern experience of ghosting or just losing access to a digital community. It's like a computer network where a node doesn't burn down, it just goes offline.
Yeah.
You know the person still exists in the world. You might even see their green status dot on a chat app or see them breathing and sending emails in a different time zone. But your specific localized connection to them is permanently, structurally severed.
And the psychological dissonance of knowing they are alive but totally inaccessible creates this unique, dispersed kind of mourning.
Mm.
The codex defines this as synthetic grief. And it is the culmination of the entire experiment. Marcus is the final receiver, and he is forced to process all previous modalities simultaneously.
Oh, that makes sense.
He is grieving with the Florentines' aesthetic specificity, the Germans' ontological depth, and the Russians' cosmic scope. But he is grieving someone who is dispersed across a global network.
It is the grief of scale.
Exactly. The grief of losing a connection that was built on data and signals, something that was never fully solid to begin with.
So he's sitting in a server room in Berlin, surrounded by blinking lights, feeling the crushing weight of a relationship that exists now only as memory and metadata. And the PDF file issues its final instruction to Marcus, written in plain English. Now finish it.
Because the PDF cannot execute the final command. A file is just an instruction manual.
Right.
The transfiguration requires a biological host. It has to happen in the physical world, and Marcus realizes the ultimate reversal of the entire codex. For centuries, the title of the book has been The Reality Sophia Has Been Descending. Wisdom dropping down from above, trying to penetrate the dense layers of human ignorance.
But the descent is over.
It's completely over. Because these four men, across 800 years, allowed their specific grief to crack them open, and more importantly, because they refused to close the aperture, they refused the cheap consolations of moving on. Humanity's architecture has finally adapted.
We can finally bear it.
We have learned to bear the weight of the divine. Sophia is no longer descending, she is now rising.
Oh, wow.
She is rising from below, pushing up through the open, cracked hearts of ordinary, grieving people who just choose to stay open. And the moment Marcus understands this and accepts the crack in his own foundation, the file on the Berlin server autonomously renames itself codexcomplete.pdf.
Okay, so how do we integrate this? What is the practical application of an 800-year-old metafictional argument for you listening to this deep dive right now?
Right.
We've traced the structural evolution from a red dress in 13th century Florence to a piece of ancient coal in a German mine, to the golden dawn light in the Egyptian desert, to a digitized PDF in a server room. And the persistent logical through line across all these eras is a total rejection of how we categorize pain.
Yes.
The crack in your life, the specific unconsoled pain of an irreplaceable loss or a severed connection is not a structural failure. It is not an anomaly that needs to be patched by a professional so you can get back to normal. It is a load-bearing architectural feature.
A feature, not a bug.
Exactly. It was intentionally designed to let the light in.
It demands a complete paradigm shift in how we relate to our own suffering and to the environment in which we suffer. And the source materials glossary actually leaves us with one final provocation.
Oh, lay it on me.
So we discussed the pleroma, the divine fullness that is already here, obscured only by our inability to perceive it. Well, the book insists that the pleroma is currently hidden by the static of our world.
The static.
Yeah. Think about the texture of your own modern digital life. The constant pinging of group texts, the endless avalanche of emails, the overwhelming, exhausting information overload. The standard narrative is that all of this digital noise is a barrier to profound human connection.
Sure, we hear that all the time.
But what if that assumption is backwards? What if that very digital static, that overwhelming web of dispersed signals, is the new vessel?
Oh, that's fascinating.
What if the noise of the network is the exact medium through which profound wisdom is currently trying to rise?
And what's wild is that the final entry in the glossary actually contains a dedication, spelled out in capital letters, to you. It explicitly describes the reader holding the page, or, in this case, the person listening to the audio. It points out that the final instruction of the codex, now finish it, wasn't just directed at Marcus sitting in a server room in Berlin.
No, it's directed at you.
It's directed at you. The engine has been built, the technology has been upgraded, and the network is live. So the next time you feel that crack in your foundation, The next time you feel the immense weight of the world testing your structural integrity, don't rush to patch it up.
Just let the cracks stay open.
Yeah, see what kind of light pours through.